Hey everyone, welcome back to the home studio and welcome to episode number 5 of the Stevie Richards Show. Episode 5. That's a interesting number because that is a number of vertebrae that are currently locked out in my spine. So as I wince and do this, and James asked me if I'm okay in pre-production meetings, let's take it to our co-host, James Romero. I will not hit this again, but just let it go.
Yeah, when we do I Believe Joe Hendry. Yeah. I didn't realize that you were going to play that last week. I was so taken aback. I was Anyway. Hello, I'm James, everybody. We'll do the plugs really quickly and also tell you what's going to be coming up in this show as well. Stevie Richards is going to be taking us through a journey of who was better, Shawn Michaels or Bret Hart, the eternal debate in pro wrestling that still somehow, even after 20-odd years, still rages on. We're also going to be talking about size of wrestlers, the vanilla midget debate as well, and to top it off, to end the show, we're going to be discussing wrestling rings, secrets of the ring as well, that we promised last week and then we didn't have time to get round to. Very briefly, I've got 2 books. I've written 2 books, one on Owen Hart, one on The Rock, 2 fine biographies. If you'd be so kind as to check them out on the links in the description from Amazon, that I'd be more than appreciative. And Stevie's got some things he wants to share with you as well, including cameos and fitness and the whole bit.
Well, first and foremost, I try to get you every week. I didn't have anything as far as a sound clip or something, but get ready. The openings of the show will be something that will take James off guard. That's my goal in the first couple of minutes, to throw off his rhythm. But one thing for sure, we're going to talk about secrets of the ring. There's no secret that taking bumps hurts. As I'm sitting here right now on my spine, you can't fake gravity, as one would say. Yeah, Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart as well is coming up in this episode. I was thinking, how can I get heat with not one legend, but 2 legends? So we came up with a comparison chart. We're going to score it from 1 to 10 with 10 categories, total being 100. And then whoever has the biggest score, the largest score, will still have heat with me. And the one with the less score will have more heat with me. Before we get into that, if you don't have heat with me, if you can please check out Stevie Richards Fitness. That's my fitness channel, which right now we're going to talk about recovering from my back injury and the things I do. We're also going to be adding some free workout content to Stevie Richards Fitness. Also, I have cameo.com/Stevie Richards, as well as the description in the fitness channel, all the affiliates, the recommended brands, which are affiliate links and help support the content at Stevie Richards Fitness. So we're starting off hot with Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels.
Well, before we do,
one word, who's better, and we're out.
No. Before we do, you want to mention this, Stevie, is last week we chuckled to ourselves that this is really going to wind up the fans. And it was AEW and the roster split most specifically. You wanted to mention a couple of things about it prior, sort of to open up this show.
Yeah, I left quite a few things out because we had so much time. Even what we thought was a very short segment was still 41 minutes long, and the fans and the people who commented actually wanted a deeper dive than the 41 minutes. I even wanted to include you and get your opinion on what roster you would pick. So maybe we can dedicate an entire episode to rebooking AEW, because it looks like people, for positive or negative reasons or agreement or disagreement, feel very strongly about this. And that's what we want. That's fine. But I need to defend my position on some of the people that are obviously towards the last leg of their career, whether they want to be or not. Talking about Adam Copeland, even some people talked about Keith Lee's current physical status, talked about other people that are older, Dustin Rhodes. The reason why I put them on the roster, which, by the way, was a base roster. It wasn't going to be firing anybody that wasn't on the 16 people on Rampage, the 16 people on Dynamite, and then whoever was going to be on our Saturday morning Collision family-friendly show. But if somebody's on the tail end of their career, you definitely want to make sure you get as much as you can out of them to pass the torch to the younger talent that have more miles ahead of them than behind them. That's why Adam Copeland, people like Keith Lee. Also, the other factor is, when are their contracts up and when are they going back to WWE, if they decide and if the company decides to give them a contract. The Mercedes Moné thing wasn't anything about, hey, they're paying her too much or anything like that. it was a budgetary thing. I learned from Kevin Sullivan and other people that book, and I'm sure people like Kevin Nash and everybody else, anybody who's ever booked, it's not just about putting together your roster, your dream matches. We know just putting together dream matches isn't going to draw with Tony Khan right now, but there's also a very political element to that. The financial part, how much are we paying them? We need to put Mercedes Moné on TV because she's getting paid a ton of money. Also, at the same time, you really need to factor in personal relationships. We just saw this really play out to the worst possible case scenario with the CM Punk EVPs, war. How that kind of got, and you're trying to figure out a way to not have them interact, but they keep talking about each other. They gave Punk his own show to keep them away from each other. That's a very extreme measure. But as a booker, you always need to figure these things out, to have harmony in your locker room. It's never going to be perfect, but you also need to get a return on your investment. And then you need to see who are the people where we have a sense of urgency to book them before they leave or before their career is essentially over and they have to pivot into maybe authority figure, office role, agent, stuff like that. So that's everything I factored into it. And if you go back and watch it again, which we hope you do, with those things in mind, I think the rosters would make a little bit more sense. Or you'll just tell me I'm an idiot again anyway. It doesn't matter.
I made that thumbnail, by the way, not Stevie.
I love that. You know what? I take the compliment. Yeah, that was one of the best thumbnails I've ever seen. And I was just like, when I looked at it, I showed my wife and I said, because she doesn't know any of these people, I go, you have to understand, he checked off the guy that everybody thinks doesn't deserve the push. And the inferred kind of hint is fire the guy that's pretty much your self-made star, the most over guy in the company. We're getting rid of that guy. Excellent job, James. Way to go, man.
It was an easy one.
Some people respected the hustle, right?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I would.
Oh, that was you, not the...
Right, we're going to move on then. So that's sort of the AEW. We will revisit AEW. I hope most people watching this are like, because any criticism of AEW, some people, you just hate AEW, that kind of thing. It's like, no, we're trying to actually, look at it with a unbiased eye and that kind of thing.
Well, there's another point about we don't watch the product. Of course, we have a limited time watching it, but this is somebody coming in as a booker and getting familiar with the talent and then looking at the talent they're familiar with and doing that. They can BS all day long. No booker's going to watch 10 months of stuff and then go in and try to revamp the roster in one session. This is an ongoing type thing that they spend 40, 60, 80 hours a week. Hopefully they do. There's also comments about this looks like more thought than Tony put into his own company. I saw that one.
Mm. Hey, well, you know what? I mean, we should do a part 2 at some point.
Clickbait title, Tony Khan puts no thought in the AEW.
I got no thought. Okay, note made. Right, let's get into the meat of the show. So the title is Bret versus Shawn of this episode, as I'm sure you'll have seen at the beginning on the little graphic. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, the eternal battle between who is better. And really, it goes down to preferences. I'm sure everyone will agree. Oh, I'm sure not everyone will agree. I'm sure someone will say, well, definitely Bret's better than Shawn or vice versa. We have come up with a table of 10 different categories. And we're going to score every single one, Bret and Shawn, between 1 and 10. I very much doubt anyone's going to get a 1. They're all going to be fairly high scoring. And then we're going to have a score out of 100, according to Stevie, of who is the better wrestler. And then you might look at the score and you might throw it out and decide it's the other person anyway. But as Stevie, are you going to make your way to the whiteboard now, or should we discuss first some points?
No, I think we got to give a lot of context before this, because I think, well, first and foremost, when I was growing up, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, all the magazines, and everybody in general, the fan bases of WWF at the time, and then with NWA initially, then WCW, was Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. Now, the reason why I think this comparison is even stronger in a way is because it was dream booking, it was dream matches. They never touched. And then when they finally wrestled, for some reason, Vince McMahon thought Hogan versus Flair would not draw. That's why they had different main events at WrestleMania 8, I believe, in Indianapolis, excuse me, was Hogan versus Sid and Savage versus Flair. Initially, that booking was supposed to be Hogan versus Flair, which I disagree with Vince McMahon. I think they really would have drew based on the fact that, you have an interpromotional dream match. But at that time, Vince McMahon wasn't ready to even acknowledge there was competition until the Monday Night Wars. That's what it seemed like. Do you agree with that?
Yeah,
So it would have went against his mantra of acknowledging them.
Well, I'm wondering if it was more they didn't draw very well in the house shows, because I'm looking, they had a tour of house shows. Man, they even wrestled in Hawaii in December 1991, St. Louis, Landover, Hershey, Richmond. I'm just wondering if he maybe even looked at how many people the events drew. But the thing is that this is in late 91, early 92, when fans were leaving in droves anyway. So, I mean, or maybe you're right. Maybe Vince just looked at, look, if I put Ric Flair over Hulk Hogan here, that's admitting WCW's better. And we've seen that time. We've seen it before, Vince, with UWF, and Dusty Rhodes booked it that way. We've seen it beyond with the Invasion that you were part of and there that night, that we'll talk about at some point, I think, later on this episode. Huge missed opportunity, I think.
Yeah, but I think now that you put it that way, in that context, Vince was in a corner. He had nothing to do, so he kind of had to scrap it. And we did get two really solid matches, a great match between Savage and Flair at WrestleMania 8. And Hogan and Sid was a dream match within itself. That was sort of WWE versus WCW, because Sid was really known in WCW. And Hogan works a lot better with those type of guys, the monsters that he needs to slay. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen the other. They got two main event matches out of that rather than one. So, and I believe that was at the WrestleMania 8 finish where Ultimate Warrior made a return. So you had a lot of good that came out of the way they booked it. But why I'm talking about Hogan and Flair in comparison to Bret and Shawn have had 3 to 4 reincarnations of their rivalry. Philly accent, can never pronounce it. Their matches, their storylines, their angles, they've had a good 3 reincarnations of that. The tag team, the Intercontinental, they were the first ones that did the ladder match before Shawn and Razor did it. Then, of course, the Montreal Screwjob era during the beginning of the Attitude Era. Those are 3 strong angles that we've gotten hundreds, if not thousands, of matches between Bret and Shawn. Yet here we are in 2024, still arguing, debating who's better. To me, I think that's a stronger, case for two guys as polar opposites, constantly driving this debate. Nobody drives the debate anymore of Hogan versus Flair. It's kind of like Vince squashed it after he refused to make it a main angle in WWE.
Well, Hogan squashed it in WCW because I think he beat Flair 1,000 times. And Flair, to the best of my knowledge, I'm sure he's beaten Hogan more than once, or, pinfall. There was an I Quit match in like February 1999 on like maybe the uncensored pay-per-view where where Flair won. And he was one of the.
But Hogan was Hollywood Hogan, wasn't he? And Flair was a babyface.
Yeah, but this was the time just after. Yeah, but then that's the one they do the double switch. But they say the double switch, but it didn't really work out because no one wanted to boo Flair anyway. And then they sort of had to, and then Anyway, I still say that was worse than the finger poke of doom.
Which part?
The just killing of interest in WCW, because they were just doing everything that they could to just kill interest in '99.
Well, when he worked, was it Bash at the Beach where Hogan came in, won the title in his first match against Flair in Orlando, correct? He 94. Had Shaq, he had Mr. T, it was 94. That was, at the time, the highest buy rate for a WCW pay-per-view. So maybe based on that, they're like, well, they love seeing Hogan beat Flair. Let's keep beating Flair, and that's the end of it. And they really need to strap on the rocket to Hogan again to get him over. Of course, people grew really tired of that, and thank God they pivoted and made Hogan a heel, which, by the way, almost never happened. They had to hide Hogan. Kevin Sullivan famously said, hide him from his people, his friends, his agent, so they wouldn't talk him out of turning heel. That was Bash at the Beach as well, right?
Yeah, 96. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And then you got the Russo. And Bash at the Beach is, man, that's a crazy event. So many crazy things
Russo
happen.
in 2000 as well.
Yep.
And
Hogan was involved with that as well. So, okay. But now we're going to talk about Shawn and Bret. And for more context, and we were talking about this, we weren't sure if we were going to include this because we have probably an entire segment, maybe an entire episode dedicated to steroids. What we're looking at here is, and just choose your own adventure, kind of your imagination as a fantasy booker. Vince always, larger than life, walked through an airport, giants, monsters among men. And then the steroid trial happened. And the company needed to pivot. They had no choice. They needed to represent or show a representation that not everybody on top of WWF at the time needed to be a monster to be a main eventer. So therefore, now we see Shawn and Bret at the forefront of that push to say, look, not all of our guys are on steroids or performance-enhancing drugs. And would we have a different WWE today, or would we have a WWE if Vince didn't pivot into that out of really necessity?
Do you know who I credit as bringing, aside from the federal government, is for the shift towards the smaller wrestler, say smaller in quotation marks, still massive, Savage? Because not only was he champion for a year, he was a huge draw. He was maybe smaller than Bret, or maybe around the same height and size. And it was proven that Savage could do it. I mean, they drew monster houses with Savage as champion. And wasn't WrestleMania 5, I don't know if you adjust it for inflation, one of the best drawing WrestleManias ever?
Well, that's really a testament. Yeah, I forgot about Savage for half a second. That's hard to do. He's larger than life, even no matter what his stature is, his weight, his height. That's a larger than life character. That's what I was talking about last week. Savage epitomizes all that. So, and give him extra credit during the time when the monsters were all being pushed, that Vince, give him credit as well, put Savage at the top as the top babyface and the top heel. WrestleMania 5, that's amazing. That's an amazing stat because they held WrestleMania 4 in the same exact building and outdrew it at WrestleMania 5, and just, flipped the script where Savage won the tournament in WrestleMania 4 as a babyface with Hogan's help. 1 year later, Mega Powers explode and Savage and Hogan are working the main event of WrestleMania 5. So you think, well, people are going to get tired of it. They went back to the same exact building a year later with the same players in different positions and outdrew the year before. That's awesome. Great point.
Yeah, buy rates, WrestleMania 4, 485,000. Buy rate, WrestleMania 5, 767,000. That wouldn't be beaten for a while. I think that wouldn't be beaten until maybe even WrestleMania 18. That did 800,000, I think, with Tyson.
Yeah, but you're talking about Trump Plaza versus a stadium show, and this is, got a big fight feel. They were really smart to go to Trump Plaza 2 years in a row. That was a great combination between them, or collaboration. So getting back to this, that's the context there. So it did happen. They did pivot, Bret and Shawn and a lot of other people. And I'm sure Savage was another one that could be considered within that size, that we can still push Savage and do stuff with him. And of course, I think at that time too, if I'm not speaking about the wrong timeline, Vince was starting to try to push Savage and Hogan, and Hogan already left for WCW by 92, right?
Hogan had left in 93 in WWF,
93.
And then he started appearing in WCW in 94.
Okay. But with that being said, Savage also famously had said before he wanted to work a program with Shawn Michaels down the line from this point. And they said, we're leaning on a new generation, the next gen. He goes, "Oh, I think I'll get a second opinion." My horrible Savage impression. It's like Johnny Ace impersonating Savage, but he said, "I'll get a second opinion." Then went to WCW. So, yeah, this is a good pivot for the company to show more athleticism, a different style, kind of evolve the product, and Bret and Shawn are at the front of that. So where do we start about this?
Well, before we get to that, I want to get on to, I promise everybody we'll be getting onto the table, but since we're talking about the steroid federal government investigation, the trial and everything, then you couldn't push people who were roided monsters anymore. Savage was almost like he was on the roids. I'm sure everyone was at that time. He was on the roids at that time, but he still wasn't a monster-sized guy. He was the prototype for the Bretts and Shawns of the 90s. That's pretty much established, I think, or I think it's fair enough to presume that. I want to ask you a couple of questions. One, the vanilla midgets, the Kevin Nash termed phrase that went around WCW. So this, it wasn't on his podcast. It was many years earlier, so I got confused about that, but I'd seen the quote recently where he said that Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit in 2004, when they won the respective world titles of Raw and SmackDown, did the hug in the middle of the ring. He said, the business has never recovered from that. The business has never been the same. That's the day the business died because they were both 5'7". And I haven't got the quote in front of me, but it was something like, you don't watch pornography, and then there's a guy with a 3-inch pecker as the male member. A sort of crass comparison that makes absolutely no sense in that regard. But also, so one is vanilla midgets. Two is how small is too small to be a main eventer in quotation marks. And three, were you ever accused of being too small?
That's a lot of questions.
Okay. Let's start with the last one first then. So were you ever accused of being too small for wrestling?
Yes, 100%. I was told that I was too small to even be Intercontinental Champion at one time. Now, my win-loss record, if you told me about that, then I would say yeah. But as far as the size, yeah, I was told I was too small at one point to push in the certain spots as a singles wrestler. I wasn't big enough as far as height. Definitely as far as weight, I was a little bit of a leaner guy, even though I topped out sometimes at 225, 230. My average is usually around 205. When I first came back after losing all the RTC weight, I was between 192 and 199. I was very lean, and then I gained a little bit of muscle and weight back from there. But yeah, I was told that. That's the part where it's totally evolved now, because now I would probably be too big, slow, and lumbering for the current products. I wouldn't be able to move like that. So yeah, I was told that. For all I know, the office, they used to tell me, hey, if you can just manage to gain 10 to 15 pounds in the next month. And I would look at them and like, are you asking me to do it? No, we're just, no. Yeah, okay. So, but I wasn't going to do that. And we have a whole episode about that. And I'll give all my reasons why I've never done that, because they're really just very simple reasons, about that, but talking about some of my experiences dealing with that. But yeah, getting back to that, I totally was told I was too small, and that's fine. It's a subjective business no matter what. Your goal as a wrestler, it's to try to convince somebody in power or somebody who has influence of those in power to at least give you an opportunity, a shot. They're always going to think of too tall, too short, too fat, too skinny, too light, too heavy, too tan, not tan enough. I don't like you have long tights or short tights or whatever. They can think of any reason. Your job as a talent is to eliminate every objection from the office. If one of those is you're a vanilla midget, you kind of have to fight through that and show them different layers of your character. You got to show them you can do stuff in the ring that nobody can do. And I do definitely believe Benoit and Guerrero showed they can do a style that not many people in the company at the time could consistently do. And also, not so much with Chris. Eddie was such a character, not a gimmick, but the whole presentation, the entrance, the lowrider, all these different things, the song, even the babyface song, then the heel song was just a very weird kind of dystopian version of the old one. I mean, Eddie Guerrero was one of the greatest talents, one of the greatest characters, one of the most charismatic people, both in and outside the ring. that you would ever have. And if somebody just says, well, he's short, and that's how you discount it, think about how many awesome talents during those times where if somebody had said that, they're never getting pushed, or Vince has never given them a first look, much less a second. How many Eddie Guerreros and Chris Benoit's from an in-ring perspective, when you mention Benoit's name, you need to say that. How many did we miss on? How many characters, how many great talents, how many potential legends did the business miss out on by being so damn short-sighted? No pun intended.
You saved me from saying it then.
I know, you were smart.
I've got an Eddie Guerrero fact for you. I only just learned a couple of days ago. There was a WCW focus group back in, I don't know, 96, 97, something like that. I don't think it was in late WCW. And they showed, I think it was non-wrestling fans, a bunch of different wrestlers, their presentation, their matches, their entrances, the whole thing. The only one of the big legends in WCW, or the big stars at the time in WCW, that got any real reaction was Sting. So your Lex Lugers and your whoever else, Kevin Nash's and whatever, they all got the, maybe not a thumbs down, but disinterest from the focus group. The person that the focus group loved the most, by far, was Eddie Guerrero. And he was 5'6", or 5'7", or whatever he is. But he oozed personality. From like 98 onwards, yeah.
And that's what makes a 5'6", 5'7", 5'8" guy seem 6'8". The attitude, the everything. I can't even quite. That's the thing about Eddie too. I'm trying to put my finger on something or kind of formulate, traits and characteristics. He just had the it factor. He absolutely had the it factor. So much so, when somebody goes up the top to a splash, what do?
Mm-hmm.
The Three Amigos are still being done, and they're still chanting Eddie's name. How many decades after he's gone? So it's unfortunate somebody like Eddie's still not here today. But I still say, even today in 2024, how many talents are not being utilized for whatever reason I gave? Height, weight, look, whatever it might be.
Chad Gable's a perfect example who's someone,
he's
Vince
Kurt
McMahon,
Angle.
yeah, it's Shorty G. And then they just let him be himself and be a personality. And guess what? He's, one of the, maybe not a top star, but he's one of the biggest stars in WWE these days. And how tall is he? 5'8"?
Yeah, but he has legitimate backgrounds, which, by the way, I should have mentioned Kurt Angle in the Legitimate Fighter thing last week. Mm-hmm. Chad Gable's in that as well.
And Steve Motherfucking Blackman, which apparently is a thing from wrestling. Hello, Wrestling Bios, by the way. That's a meme that's gone around there for a while.
I've been in the ring with Steve Blackman. I have to probably agree with those people that comment. Please, Steve, James cut it out. I didn't forget about you. He cut it out. But yeah, when we're talking about Bret and Shawn, and that's where we're getting back to as well, Nash was right there thick as thieves with Shawn. Shawn, same height as Bret, not far off from Eddie Guerrero or Chris Benoit. So I wondered if seeing those guys work throughout the years changed his mind about that. He doesn't really, that was like an all old shoot interview back in the art video days or something where he said that, correct? It wasn't anything.
So you tell me.
Recent.
I didn't realize. I thought it was from his podcast. Right. Okay. So there's two more things we'll talk about before we get onto the Shawn and Bret thing. Is the vanilla midgets thing, which we need to take as a quote and sort of dissect that. But how small is too small? Because I'm going to give you some champion names on the shorter side. Bryan Danielson did fantastic as champion in 2014. MJF last year, he was the champion for the longest time in AEW. The smallest of all, Rey Mysterio. Now, maybe, I know Rey Mysterio is a generational talent. I struggled with him as a world heavyweight champion. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, they sure didn't book him to be a successful or have any kind of traction world champion. They threw him in a three-way match at WrestleMania 22, I believe, in Chicago.
Yeah, Orton and
with him, Randy Orton, and Batista. Or no.
Damn it!
Could you look that up, please?
I will.
Hey, it was You're in a three-way dance at WrestleMania, so you're splitting the focus three ways with that, or you're diluting the fact that Rey Mysterio has that run to the world title.
It's Kurt
And
Angle,
I
by the
have
way.
no doubt they booked a three-way match, much like with Bryan Danielson when in New Orleans. I think that was WrestleMania 30. The three-way matches, usually when I see those, outside of injury or somebody's kind of limited and they need to kind of share the workload, they don't truly believe in whoever might go over, or they're trying to hedge their bets to see who else they can put over besides that person. And I got that impression. I was with the company at that time. So I was watching it all play out. And I'm thinking, why aren't they giving Ray like the focus of that? Why isn't it just the journey of this underdog going into WrestleMania? Has no, like Bryan Danielson, they got it right finally when the people like really push for it. That should have been Rey Mysterio's run from the Royal Rumble to WrestleMania. Yet they seemed like they were hedging their bets. They were kind of half foot in on Ray, and then kind of trying to figure out if the other two would be a better finish. And they went with the predictable finish, but it fell flat. It just fell super flat. And I feel bad for Ray because he's so over, he doesn't need a belt. But you know what? He's also a legend and he deserved a really legitimate world heavyweight title run. I would say even giving him the big gold belt, because that was the one he was going for, right?
He's been heavyweight champion twice.
Yeah, but was he WWE champion?
He was WWE champion in. I remember him wearing the belt. I just don't remember what year, 2011 or something. So after some research, very briefly, because I had a memory of Ray wearing that big WWE title belt. He was champion for less than a day. I know you remember that. We'll just briefly get to his 2 world title runs. The one that we remember WrestleMania was Randy Orton and Kurt Angle in a triple threat match. So we forgot Kurt Angle twice, 2 weeks in a row there, somehow. And he was also world champion in 2010 for about a month before losing it to Kane. He defeated Jack Swagger, one of the other forgotten world champions of this time. And then Rey Mysterio lost it to Kane a month later at Money in the Bank. And Rey Mysterio, for a brief time, was WWE champion as well. And you remember this?
Well, I do remember this. I don't know if it was the same night. I believe he won the WWE title at Raw. Then he lost it to John Cena. And then Punk returned and had the other world title or the other WWE title. And they did the famous thing, raising it up. And then they had a match at SummerSlam after that. So basically, this was Money in the Bank. Punk beat Cena in Chicago and left the company, which I think they should have run that 6-8 months, him showing up at different promotions and him literally a free agent doing different stuff all over the world. They really didn't maximize that because he was back 3 to 4 weeks after that, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the vacant see how it gets confusing? The vacant WWE championship, Ray wins it, then loses it to Cena at the end of that Raw. Then Punk returns. So essentially, and see, that's what makes me upset because Ray deserves better. Not only that 3-way match between him, Randy Orton, Kurt Angle, which you can see that can go any which way. And I think that's the way they booked it to see, do we want to put it on Ray? We got Kurt, we got Randy. Who's going to win it? Then the WWE thing, you're champion for a cup of coffee. Ray deserves better than that. There was no story involved. Ray wasn't able to, the babyface champions, and especially underdog, sympathetic babyface champions, are very, very hard to stay over. They want to see people get beat for the title. That's why the heel and the babyface is chasing the heel is always going to draw more money, in my opinion. This Cody run, who knows what's going to happen? But basically, when you have a heel champion, it's much better. But I still get back to the fact, why would you do that to Ray? And even that World Heavyweight title run, it was really watered down. It was really lackluster.
It was like The Undertaker. In the early days, they would always give him opponents so much bigger than him. So it was either King Kong Bundy or Giant Gonzalez or whoever it was. And Ray, he was always wrestling Great Khali or Mark Henry or something. And apart from the fact that it strained credulity that he could beat these guys who were 3 or 4 times his genuine size, I mean, it can't make for the greatest, most fun matches either.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so, but I mean, Ray could work around anybody. But then what you're doing is you have him destroying monsters, and maybe it's a tough spot to be in. So I would have really have tried to at least build Ray up to be that Dragon Slayer from Rumble on, even in the Rumble. If he eliminated guys much bigger than him or kind of sidestep, low bridge, did certain things to get guys eliminated, yeah, right there you have something. But I know we're kind of like beating this, all the way down, but these facts about Rey Mysterio, and now he's just as over as he's always been. Now you have Dominic, you have a bunch of stuff going on. I would love to see, this is just my fantasy booking mind. I think this would get Dom over so much as a heel. Ray is going to, maybe WrestleMania or Rumble or whatever for his last chance at the WWE title or whatever title he wants to go for. If he loses, he retires. And Dominic costs him the match. That's heat. That's passing the torch. That's something I think Ray would go for if he's ready to leave the business. Of course, he looks and works just as good as he ever did. So why would he ever leave?
So the last thing before we get on to Bret and Shawn is how small is too small. So we've established that height doesn't really matter if you've got personality, if you've got the talent, or if you can present yourself as the underdog that the fan can root for. But this has been leveled to AEW more specifically than WWE as of recent, is that a lot of their roster is very small and it's tough. And the other thing is there's a lot of 50-50, not only 50-50 booking, there's 50-50 going 50-50 in matches, like we've seen recently with Tommy Billington Jr., Marco Stunt, other undersized guys, or undersized in quotation marks, Jungle Boy, Sammy Guevara, guys like that. So when does small become too small?
Marco Stunt would be, definitely too small, but he's also too thin at the same time. When he came out for that match with Jack Perry, I was like, oh my God, he makes Jack Perry look like Jack Perry's my size. It was pretty just telling if you're a new viewer, and you have to think about that. If there's somebody just tuning in to the product and that's what you're putting out there, that can be very negative, or they just laugh and they change the channel and go to WWE, where there are smaller guys and girls there, but they're presented in such a way where they're larger than life. How small is too small? Well, man, there's a lot that can go into that. Besides the look, besides the airport walk that Vince McMahon loves so much, I would say also when you're that small, like a Marco Stunt size, your injury proneness is really, really raised up a level. When you got to get thrown around, and if somebody my size or bigger is throwing a Marco Stunt around, he's not going to be able to take a proper bump because he's so light. He's flying. I've seen that kid take bumps where I thought he broke his ankle. His hip got disjointed. It just looks ugly when you do that. So I'm not for one to say that anybody is too small, but I would say Marco Stunt is it's pretty much the epitome of, okay, we've gotten too short, too thin, that's too much with that. When Jack Perry, Bryan Danielson, whoever else is under 6 foot makes themselves look like they're 7 foot next to Marco Stunt, that's not it. And I don't want to see a kid not have work, but you got to find something else for him. In the ring is not the place for somebody that size. So, he's micro championship wrestling size.
AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling beforehand, they've proved for years that, smaller guys can be huge stars and huge draws. World of Sport Wrestling.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah, please.
About that? Sorry to interrupt. This is where Eric Bischoff, or whoever came up with the idea of the cruiserweight division. Perfect. They had a chance to showcase, to be featured, to have their own championship, to have their own storylines and angles. It fell short a little bit because it wasn't the...
But then they're never elevated. I mean, with Bischoff, whoever's booking, they were always in the same position. And later on in '99, they tried to mix people like Dean Malenko with some of the bigger guys, but then it was always Dean Malenko or like Kurt Hennig or Mongo McMichael or something like that, and it just doesn't pass the vision test. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what do? I mean, you basically create a whole new division in these people. You tried to do that, and then when they're intermingling in a storyline or a match with the Giants, of course. But if he never created the cruiserweight division, they would have been buried from day one. So the business needs a cruiserweight division. And I love the word cruiserweight because in boxing, it means you go from a certain weight class up to the heavyweights. You're able to go back and forth. It's kind of like that 205 division with UFC back in the day. You had so many people at 205 pounds. And that's what I loved that WWE kind of took from that and created 205 Live. Then they started booking people that weren't 200, that were 250 pounds. That's not the way to go. But the concept of you need to weigh 205 or under, that was great. The Cruiserweight Classic, still to this day, I will watch if it comes up on YouTube, Cedric Alexander versus Kota Ibushi, which is one of the best cruiserweight matches I've seen. It was just incredible. That whole Cruiserweight Classic should be a yearly event, should be its own little pay-per-view. Maybe you make it like an in-your-house type thing. They can be showcased. And by the way, like you said, once they get in there with the Giants, they're kind of exposed. Well, don't expose them.
Mm-hmm.
Keep them in their own little universe. And as long as I'm getting years and years of work and pay and hopefully merchandise, royalties, whatever, I don't care if I'm pigeonholed as a cruiserweight. I'm making a living. I'm able to do that and then go and maybe go somewhere else with that cruiserweight style. Now, the only thing about the cruiserweight style as well, you can age out pretty quickly of the cruiserweight style. And I know we're going to get to a topic about what happens as wrestler when we get in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on and so forth. You are severely closing the window even smaller to your time, unless you're an anomaly like Rey Mysterio or other people that can do it in their 40s and 50s. But most of these guys and girls that work that lucha style or even work a very intense cruiserweight style, they're not long for the wrestling world, usually.
I really like, I'm going to go through some WCW, World of Sport. World of Sport's really where it started, then it migrated over to Japan, the cruiserweight style, and then from Japan over to the States. It seemed to me like a 20-year journey almost.
We steal everything from England. You were talking about The Office and all these other shows.
I was talking about lots of things that were stolen. What was the one I came up with? Not Sanford and Son, but who's Archie Bunker?
Archie Bunker.
Yeah.
All in the Family.
That was from Alf Garnett in the 60s from here. Anyway, World Sport, Memphis. People don't really realise Memphis was a cruiserweight territory. It had Lawler, who wasn't that big, and he was one of the bigger guys. Dutch, of course. Bill Dundee, he was 5'5" or 5'6". The Rock and Roll Express, a lot of the guys were a lot smaller in that territory. Stampede. And they called their not heavyweight title the mid-heavyweight title. I always thought it was a great way of getting around it. I didn't think the junior heavyweight title had the same kind of ring to it in New Japan or All Japan or whatever. But it's worked so many different places. So I think the idea is how small is too small. I mean, it's pretty damn small. But I want to bring one more thing to your attention, then we'll get to Bret and Shawn. I'm sorry I keep saying that. Is it the amount of small wrestlers that's a problem? Because, as an example, WWE and ECW, Spike Dudley was your undersized, skinny guy who was taking all the crazy bumps. That was his thing. But you can't really populate an entire promotion with small guys, I guess, in that respect, if you've also got a heavyweight division.
Yeah, you're almost watering down the sympathy level and the underdog kind of gimmick. You're sort of like now having multiple people have that same thing and different storylines and you're repeat. It's kind of like working the same body part every match on a TV show. It's like, what are you doing? Give me some variety. And it is a circus. It's a variety show. That's what pro wrestling is. You got the Lion Tamer, which is the main event. You got the clown cars for the comedy. You got the acrobats, which is the cruiserweights. I'm just kind of like going just surface level what it is. But essentially, it's a P.T. Barnum type presentation of different acts. Now, the problem is today, and the problem is back then, especially if you're talking about the cruiserweight division, and even in WCW before that, NWA, you had lots of guys that were over that were smaller. But how old is Ricky Morton? Here's a question. Ricky Morton, so undersized, short, very thin, very
He's
little
not that
muscle man.
short. He's like 5'10".
Yeah, but
Ricky Morton.
back then though,
Yeah, I'm
5'10"
sorry.
was still small.
I was stood right next to him
So
and think, dude, you're bigger than you look on
no,
TV.
he's in great shape now. He works out all the time, everything. But back then he had a very much just like his body resembled like the Mulkeys. If you want to he looked like he never worked out or but the incredible amount of intensity, charisma, psychology, be able to work the crowd and to be able to realistically stare Ric Flair right in his face, which he was shorter than Flair and other guys, and you could believe Ricky Morton as a tag team wrestler could break off into a singles. I was one of the fans that believed like he's going to be Ric Flair. This is crazy. Now, I don't know exactly, like I said, it's an it factor. I don't know what trait, characteristic, ability that Ricky Morton, Bryan Danielson, Rey Mysterio, or any of these other great talents have where they make up for their lack of stature with their size of their heart or whatever kind of just indistinguishable it factor. That's the only way I can put it. They're over. That's it. But Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson, Bryan Danielson, Rey Mysterio, all these people had to prove and overcome the stereotype that the Kevin Nash has said a long time ago. And every single booker, promoter, and person in the office, when they take a look at somebody and say, too small, they overcame that. It's easy for me. I was kind of middle of the road, 6'2", between 2 and 230. I'm kind of in that middle where I can kind of plug into anywhere. They had to make it work with what they had and also what the perception of what they didn't have and overcome that.
I think, well, you know what? We thoroughly covered that, quite frankly. That was an excellent segment, if I do say so myself. Right, we're going to go on to our segment.
I can't. I'm never that cocky. I always, after we're done, I'm like, oh my God, I sound like a friggin' idiot.
No, I just go. Do you know what? Weirdly, I'll leave this in as well. We've got Enzo Amore on the main channel in a day or two's time. It'll probably already be out.
He's a favorite from the AEW thing.
Yeah,
they love that idea.
205 as well is what reminded me. 205 Live, because he was the champion. He replaced pretty much Austin Aries, and I was thinking, man, I don't think that went very well. And then I text my editor and I said, "How did it go?" And he just texted back and went, "Absolute gold." That okay. I have no ability to look back at an interview and think if it's good or not. You know what I mean? So at least we share that.
Yeah, we're both OCD. You know, a little bit of just self-deprecation, all that different stuff. We just want to make it better each and every time, and that's why we're striving to do that. So,
and that's why we're going to be bringing in the whiteboard now. In fact, so as
it's
promised,
time to get heat with Bret and Shawn. Let's go, baby.
For this segment, Stevie is at the whiteboard where he is going to be grading in 10 different categories: Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, out of 1 to 10. And at the end, we are going to finally figure out mathematically who the greater wrestler is, Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels. Over to you, Stevie.
Wow, no pressure at all, James. Thank you so much. I hope to only get heat with one of these guys, but may not turn out that way. But in all seriousness, I am such a fan of both guys. These are two of the greatest talents ever in wrestling history. And paired together, we're going to get to creating memorable moments. Down on the bottom, man, I almost fillied out on that one. My memorable moments. There we go. But just to give people, what we're doing here, I'm going to go through all the categories with the numbers, add them up. Then we're going to sit back down and James and I are going to discuss why I came up with these particular numbers. And we're also going to explain here and when I sit down what these mean. Number one, technical wrestling. So what's technical wrestling? It's basically your moveset, the accuracy, your form, basically your foundational technical wrestling, but it incorporates some other things. Shawn Michaels by no means is a slouch in his category, but Bret Hart, the excellence of execution. I've never seen personally a botch, a mistake, at least one that wasn't covered up or anything else, or Bret miss a move he didn't intend to miss. So my number here is 10 for Bret, 7 for Shawn, just because Bret nobody is as good as Bret when it comes to technical wrestling. Now, striking's a different type of thing. There's going to be a lot of context to this back and forth. Comment below. Let me know what you think about all these categories: striking, punching, forearms, kicks, not counting the super kick, sweet chin music, which was a finish. But man, this is tough. I would have to give both guys something that looks like a nine. It's a nine. Both guys are a nine. I don't think anybody's truly perfect at striking. I mean, Taker's up there at a 9, 10, but I can't give him 10s all the way down. Although there are a lot of things here they could get 10s on, but there's always room for improvement. I would say Bret was a little bit better at different strikes, different types of kicks, the European uppercut, which is extremely difficult to do, flippers, forearms. Shawn's punches were kind of during the match a little bit all the same. The thing with Shawn as opposed to Bret, Shawn, whether he was deep into a match or at the beginning, ran the ropes the same way, had the same energy, the same pacing. Where Bret, as the match went on, he would sell, he would have a burst of energy in the comeback or towards the finish. But Bret, with the gears, as far as technical wrestling and striking, had a little bit of an edge over Shawn. So putting matches together, hey, you know what? Both are 10s. Both are 10s. Their psychology is awesome. Shawn has a different type of psychology with his style. Bret also does, but these guys can lead a match. That's why it's interesting. I wish that cameras, well, even though it exposes the business, would have sat down and really documented how they talk a match over, especially when things were not very good between them. That's good TV. I wish that we would have saw them two kind of putting that match together in posterity, like years down the line, show that, and it would have been nice to see. So, babyface, this is going to be really hard. I'd have to say that Bret as a babyface is around a 7. Shawn as a babyface, I the only reason I can't give him a 10, I gave him a 9, James. The only reason is no matter what, the women will love Shawn, and then there's guys that'll appreciate his work and be big fans. But there's always going to be a segment, a demographic of guys that are going to hate Shawn Michaels because the women loved him back then when he was the Heartbreak Kid. So can't quite give him a 10. The reason why I gave Bret a lower score as a babyface is because Bret is you can appreciate him as a talent. You can appreciate his wrestling ability. We're going to get the charisma and promos. I feel like that is where Bret falls a little bit short as a babyface, not a heel, but as a babyface, it's a little flat. The best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. Basically, I'm going to out wrestle you. But in the same vein, Shawn Michaels had more blood feuds, personal issues. Bret and Owen drew great ratings and actually had amazing matches. But how many times are you going to have that blood feud of a brother versus a brother? Shawn had a lot more personal issues, storylines that surrounded it. This is just my observation with this. Still very high scores. So these guys are very, very good. Now we get to the heel. This is where you're going to hate this. As heels, they both get 10s. You know why? For one particular storyline, one angle. When they were in the US, Bret Hart famously said, the US is a toilet and the enema will be right here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I remember that promo. When they were in the US, Bret was a heel. When they were in Canada, Shawn was a heel. They drew so much heat in their opposite countries that it was just awesome to see that play out. Bret as a heel, I think that was his best work with the Hart Foundation and against Shawn, against Steve Austin. That double turn at WrestleMania 13 between Austin and Bret, amazing, done to perfection. And if Bret didn't want to really fully embrace being a heel, Austin would not have been able to be the babyface he is today. presentation. Now, what I assume, I'm going to go to you for a second, James. What you're talking about with presentation is their entrance, music, ring attire, poise, presence, that type of stuff, right?
Yeah, do they look like a superstar? It's essentially that, how they walk, how they move, the music. Yeah, the whole package, but we're not talking charisma. We're not talking the wrestling. Just if you could just look at them.
10 out of 10. When you combine their music, which is Bret Hart's music, you know it right away in your head. Shawn Michaels, of course, has lyrics, so you know that right away. The pink and black, the vibrant colors, the fireworks, the pyro, the Titantron, everything, the energy. And this is WWE. This is the machine. If they were in AEW and Bret, you saw him in WCW, it just wasn't the same. The WWE promotional machine, the WWE production machine, the WWE monster machine is what can make anybody's presentation a 10 out of 10. So that's more on WWE, but these guys figured out what works, their color schemes. You talked about with those WCW rings and the AEW ones. The color schemes are really important. Bright, vibrant colors. And also the fact, even though Bret seemed to be very laid back and kind of reserved and maybe monotone coming out, there was a bit of intensity with his entrance. Shawn's easy. Shawn just is so over the top and so charismatic, and we'll get into that. But each guy has, I believe, perfect presentation. So, promos. This is where we're going to have the biggest, widest margin. And Bret admits this too, by the way, when he rates himself. I would put Bret, his promos. This is where I split it though. Let's do two different numbers. I'm not going to, add the numbers or anything. His promos as a babyface, a 3. His promos as a heel, an 8. So that's what we're looking at right here. So you can pick whatever number. The 3 number will get me more heat and we'll have better clickbait titles and thumbnails. That'll probably be the one we go with. So Shawn, promos. Got to give Shawn, man, it's hard to say. I so badly want to give him a 10. You got to not give him, you don't want to give all 10s across the board. Screw it. I'll show you. So he's a 10, dude. His promos are, he talks people into the building. He talks people, especially as a heel, to want to buy a ticket to see Bret Hart or anybody else kick his ass. That's a heel. He leaned into the Heartbreak Kid, had guys. That's why guys probably still hated him as a babyface because he was so convincing as that womanizing heel. As a heel, all the women wanted and all the guys were jealous of. So, and them hating him actually made Shawn right. So, charisma. This is very tough too because I believe Bret, as a heel, had tons of charisma because he was speaking his truth. But overall, charisma, I'll give Bret a 5, and I'll give Shawn a 10. When we get into the personal stories, you're going to know I'm being objective with giving Shawn so many 10s, by the way. So, creating memorable moments, really easy. 10 and 10. Montreal screw job alone, what's more, it changed the entire business. There's no memorable moment that usurps that. You can have your Hogan Rock looking back and forth in Toronto at WrestleMania, but this moment, the screw job, changed the entire business, changed the entire landscape of wrestling, changed the entire everything about how we view professional wrestling. Out of the ring attitude. I've only met Bret once for a very short time. He seemed really laid back, seemed cool. Shawn, I've had a few more dealings with. So it depends on what version we're talking about because he's so open about the way he used to be. I got Shawn in his hybrid personality. How's that? Sometimes cool, didn't really know what you were going to get. So I would say out of the ring attitude, Bret definitely has more people that say he has a great attitude, but towards the end, there were a lot of people that didn't understand. Cornette famously said that, this guy's a prick. That's what he called Shawn Michaels and a few other words. But he was upset Bret was leaving, but he also didn't know why Bret was being the way he was being, but they didn't know the really deep personal issues between these two guys. So I'd say out of the ring attitude, from what I heard and what I met, I would give it an 8. What is up with my 8s there? Shawn, 4. That's not Shawn Michaels NXT booker and hero to the masses and the young wrestlers out there. That's Shawn Michaels, the talent that I had to deal with in catering, in the locker room, and backstage. So there we go. So as we total, I'll sit down and you're totaling them up because wrestlers are bad at math.
So the totals are now I've pretty much averaged up promos for Bret to a 6. It's not quite. It's 3.5, but I've rounded up to a 6 for Bret. Bret gets 83 out of 100. Shawn Michaels gets 89 out of 100 of a potential, out of 100, a score of the perfect pro wrestler. I've got a few things. We're going to talk about the out of the ring attitude thing with Shawn in a minute. But before we do, I want to pull up a few things that you mentioned. Selling. And I don't know if it was in technical striking or putting a match together. I think it was putting a match together, excuse me. Now, you make a great point there, and I think that wrestlers today really don't do it, even the wrestlers that everyone thinks are about the best in the world. And I'm specifically bringing up MJF versus Will Ospreay. That happened, was it a week ago? Or 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, the 250th episode of Dynamite, I believe.
That's absolutely it. Now, that's what I noticed. They were doing the tired selling, and then MJF would turn around to the camera and be completely just angry and, just forget about the stone face and then yell into the camera. And then he'd do the tiredness thing again. And then he and Will Ospreay would do like a 3-minute routine at the end where tiredness didn't play a factor whatsoever. And that's something I picked up on that people like Bret did to perfection. I think that's something that is pretty much entirely lost these days.
Then I can't add anything up to that except to totally agree with you because Bret was the master at enough but not too much when it came to that. Like, what's my percentage? Let's use video game, which even video games have your health indicator. Where's my health indicator? Whereas Shawn, I believe, a lot of times brought a lot of excitement and energy, but a lot of that energy, I remember Raven told me when Shawn was first starting to do certain things, and he was there, and Raven was not only commentating and managing, but they wanted him to be an agent, a writer, be in the office. So he was, I don't know if this was in the job title of helping out, but he had mentioned to Shawn, he goes, whether you're running the ropes in the beginning or the end of the match or after you took a big bump, you run the ropes the same exact way, the same exact speed, and you don't look like you're hurt or tired at all. And that's something like zero the hero back to zero type thing, like you said in that match.
Baby faces. You gave Bret a 7. I believe you gave Shawn a 9 on that. I couldn't see the board. That's good. I didn't know if I misheard you. See, now, I think Bret as a babyface, he's a more natural babyface. I mean, maybe even probably in real life, I guess, in the 90s as well. But as far as being a babyface goes, and I'm obviously going on his book as a reference, but I mean, you can see in footage as well, like when he visits India and stuff like that he's the guy. He's the guy who just naturally is a babyface and just people gravitate towards him, especially the kids. I would have put Bret over Shawn in that sense.
The only reason I put Bret as 2 points lower than Shawn is the promos, the poise, the presence, and even committing to the bit. Bret is a babyface, even though you might think the opposite because he considers himself a Canadian hero, an idol to children. I always got the impression that he was all in on the heel run. Like, the energy was different. So that means him as a babyface, I feel, is not as strong as being a heel. Because all the attributes of promos, charisma, and then you pair in the fact that the technical wrestling, the best there is, think about it. I'm the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. If I didn't tell you who said that, you'd be like, who's this guy think he is? That's the first thing. Now, as a babyface, he was able to back that up and convince people. But I'm sure people rolled their eyes, like even in the locker room, like, what is that what you're saying? So it's more as a heel gets over when he says that, and then he has to show his ass. In other words, show vulnerability, and maybe I'm not the best. I think there's more power and drawing ability in that. That's why I came up with that number. And Shawn is a baby face. It's high energy. It seems like a fun gimmick. It seems like people can get into it. And today they would be singing his lyrics when he came to the ring. It's more interactive than Bret's babyface.
Now, you're probably going to guess that I'm more of a Bret fan than a Shawn fan. I mean, I'll always hang my head that I like Bret's, apart from the Bulldog, Bret's my favorite. And Bret is a great working heel. So this is the notes for it. As far as heels go, I said that Bret's a great working heel, as in he throws himself into the bit, but he always seems to be in the parameters of a character. Whereas Shawn always had that natural obnoxiousness. And I imagine it came to him more easily in that sense of being a bad guy. I also wanted to make a point that in the DX days in 97 and 98, when it was him and Triple H, arguably the best version of D-Generation X, that unlike Triple H, Shawn would always do the silly. He'd always do the ha-ha until it was time to drive the point home, until it was time to hit the fans with, we're going to be fighting at this pay-per-view, whatever, and then he would be deadly serious. That's what Triple H always missed. He would always do the goofy, he would always do the talking down or berating whoever he was working with. At that time, he would never settle into the seriousness of being a main event until later on in the DX day. So I just wanted to highlight how good Shawn was as a bad guy.
Well, I would also say DX has bad guys and good guys, baby faces and heels, were just as strong. And that's based on Shawn, and I would say Hunter, even the New Age Outlaws carrying that. I have a point about that in general. Shawn makes it work, but very few people can pull it off within the same promo. In other words, you got to be one or the other. You can be silly, silly, silly. Then the polar shift, the 180 into serious the next week when something happens. Okay, now I'm serious. I always believe that meant more. Hunter, in my estimation, he's way too serious when he's too serious. And when he's trying to make fun or like be goofy or whatever, it's always been done in a very condescending way that never gets reciprocated fully back on him. We saw that glaringly obvious in the authority figure era with him and Stephanie. Once in a while, but he always would dress down people, and then nobody could stand up to him in one way or another. That's more forward after DX. So I got, so Bret has a babyface 7, Shawn 9. Both of them as heels are 10s. Number one, because Bret believed it. Bret could still be a babyface in Canada. It was the perfect storm. And of course, Shawn was a heel in Canada and still had guys hating him in America too, for the Heartbreak Kid gimmick. So very, very, but I have to say, like, these two guys, man, thank God they were able to do what can't be done today. They were able to work together despite, I don't know how much they hated each other, but hate is a good word. And they were able to draw money and now look back on it and draw more money as friends talking about it. How crazy is that?
With the DVD, of course. Bret's promos. I always thought that Bret had two types of babyface promo. One, the one where he was basically imitating wrestlers, doing the shouting things. Let me tell you something, IRS or whatever. But he always had the second kind of promo. And this was highlighted really well when he was feuding with Owen Hart in early 1994. The sit-down Bret, where he's being more Bret than Hitman. And he's just going, in no way, shape or form will I fight my brother. Really low key. And I always thought that he didn't maybe get enough credit of just being a person, portraying himself as one of the people. And he could always go into the wrestler mold as well. But I always felt, and this goes with charisma as well. I think, he wasn't over the top, but I think he had the quiet charisma. Shawn Michaels is obviously hugely charismatic in a different way, but more overtly. But for my money, I think Bret doesn't get enough credit for his babyface promos or his charisma in that sense, because there's two different types of charisma: the quiet charisma and then the overt type.
Well, when you have the it factor and you have poison presence, you can use a very minimal amount of charisma and make it look like a lot more. And that's a characteristic that Bret that still has today, I should say. Vince Russo passed something along to me that Bret had told him, and this is excellent for any young wrestler out there. Go look at Bret Hart's promos before he wins and before he loses. He never, ever says, if he knows he's going to lose, that he's going to win the match. Because he said, I'm a baby at the time, a babyface. I cannot promise something, then not deliver it. The fans won't believe me. So why promise it? That's such a little detail in a promo, but it sets up guardrails to keep yourself from becoming less over with the fans. It's really, really smart. He doesn't get enough credit for being smart. Like, nobody knows about Bret's psychology because, like you said, the charisma, the psychology, even the thought he puts into what's my 5 moves of doom. It's all very intelligent and subtle, but it means so much. And that's the best workers. Shawn's easy. Shawn's over the top. Shawn's flamboyant. Shawn flies. Shawn can do athletic stuff that most of us can't do. You can put your finger on how Shawn is over. You kind of can't put your finger on why Bret is over, which I believe makes him more over. See how I turned it around? That's politics, baby.
Okay, well, I'm not going to let you politic out of this. You got to name one. So Shawn Michaels comes out with this. Let's say we're doing 2K, whatever. 89 for Shawn Michaels. Bret Hart got 83 from your score table. But who do you like more and who do you think is greater? Let's just throw these points out. You personally, who do you think is the better wrestler overall?
Well, could you determine that word, wrestler? I mean, I encapsulates. We have 10 categories, which actually we could have had 50. If you break it down, who's the better wrestler? All right, let's do this. The better wrestler is Bret Hart. That's number one thing, technical wrestling. The better wrestler is Bret Hart. The better worker is Shawn Michaels. Because the work of storylines, personal issues, the blood feuds, all the other stuff, and just to elicit a reaction, that's a worker. Bret Hart was not as good as eliciting an emotion from the crowd as much as Shawn Michaels, positive or negative. Shawn can get a crowd going. Shawn can make you want to buy a ticket to see someone kick his ass. Bret, even as a heel, kind of appreciated him. And all about being a worker is eliciting raw emotions from the crowd and converting those emotions into money. And I don't think there's been many people better than Shawn at doing that.
You personally, who do you enjoy watching more, Bret or Shawn?
That's evolved. Shawn was the reason I got into the business. I'm talking about Midnight Rockers, AWA tag champ, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty is why I decided to get into the business. As I get older and I do these whiteboard segments and I did the previous channel, I get to appreciate Bret more. So I enjoy, in a way, watching Bret's matches more because I can put myself in there with the technical aspect of it. I can invest what I need to, but let's put it this way. Shawn Michaels would be like the wrestler or the worker for kids with ADHD. Fast-paced, crash TV type of stuff, high-flying, sensory overload. For the people that love watching, say, an entire 3-hour football game and really watching or subscribe to NFL Game Pass, and they want to see people break it down with the thing. They really want to become a student of the game. Bret Hart all the way. So in the past, Shawn, but currently, I love just immersing myself. That's a word I use with Bret. Immersing myself in his matches, pausing, slowing it down, doing that stuff. With Shawn, it's like he's more of, if I want to do cardio while I watch his matches. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well
you smart because
delivered.
you'd think I still give a political answer.
Oh, that was a political answer. Don't you worry about that. I know
so
it
you're
was.
going to say Stevie Richards can't stand to watch Shawn Michaels wrestle.
Don't give me thumbnail ideas.
That's one of the favorite parts when they say when you just veer off and start thinking of clickbait titles in the middle of this.
I'm trying to pull myself back from them.
No, I'm talking about me when I verbalize it to everybody.
Hey, well, no, do you know what? You said it, so I can put it in quotation marks, everybody. So there you go. Do you know, it's not me who picks, you know, the clips with like the first 5 seconds and then it goes to the intro, then it goes into the clip. That's not me choosing them.
That's clickbait Chris. All right.
Yes, Chris. So he's clickbaiting. I'm doing the thumbnails. You're saying it. So there you go. Right, we're going to move on. We're not going to move on, actually.
No, we got 2 more things.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Oh, we got 3 more. Charisma, creating memorable moments, and out-of-ring attitude, which is the most important segue.
Yes, well, I was actually going to go straight to the out-of-the-ring attitude. Or is there anything else you want to add with charisma?
Well, I just want to recount the 10 out of 10 for both of them with creating memorable moments. If you have never watched not just the Montreal Screwjob, but you have to watch everything leading up to it. And if you don't have the time, watch Wrestling with Shadows. We should review that documentary on a future episode. Rewatch it in 2024. Man, you want to talk about like, I can't see how that particular documentary at the time, if that was made today and it was that real and things were going on, that could quite possibly win an Emmy.
Well, they did a documentary in 2024 and it was crap. You know, behind the scenes, the WWE themselves with the whole Triple H, Cody Rhodes, The Rock kind of thing.
Oh, the WrestleMania 40 thing.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about the Wrestling with Shadows and not trying to make it look like that. Like there was real stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, there probably was real stuff going on, but we got the shiny, sheened version of everybody's holding hands and singing We Are the World, you know, kind of version of WrestleMania 40, where I bet it was a lot more gritty and interesting behind the scenes than what we're led to believe.
It was in Philly. It had to be.
Yeah.
All right. Now it's the out of ring attitude.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, out of the ring attitude. So this is something we've been discussing as one of the ideas we want to say. You've mentioned, I think, on a show beforehand that you were actually stood next to Shawn Michaels when Shane McMahon was revealed as the owner of WCW. How many more quotation marks can I make with my fingers on that kind of thing? But there was also, I don't know if you want me to cut this out or not, there was also something you heard about Shawn Michaels not being a fan of yours, and then apparently you found out he was a fan of yours or he didn't mind you or whatever it was.
No, we can leave it in. We can leave it in. I'll talk about all the stuff. So.
Yeah, okay then. So I'm going to throw it over to you. You've had Shawn Michaels, I won't say run-ins on all of them. You didn't know which kind of Shawn you were getting, you've already said. But your dealings with Shawn over time, we can talk about the super kick as well, that kind of thing. So over to you.
Okay, I want to start with Bret, if that's okay, because it's a much shorter story. I met Bret at an FCW. So this was NXT before NXT. They had FCW as the developmental territory in Tampa, Florida. Steve Kern had run it. And I went down there for like a guest coaching. I think they were trying to figure out if they were going to take me out of the ring, make me a coach. I met Bret. I had a big thing of like Arizona iced tea, like the diet iced tea, because my voice was gone again. It was really not doing very well. And Bret came up to me and I was going up to him to introduce myself. Before I could say anything, he sounded just like Stu Hart, by the way. He was just like, iced tea, huh? Works every time or something. I was like, what? And I went, and I think and this was a shoot interview I did a long time ago where they used a clickbait title, and I guess you'll use it too. Bret didn't shake my hand. So I went up to Bret. He said that, and I kind of laughed, but I didn't understand what it meant. And then I went to shake his hand, but I think just as I did that, he turned towards Colt Cabana. So I had my hand out for a good 12 seconds, and then I brought my hand down, and he turned around to me, and he was talking to everybody. And this was like so funny to me because, and it might have sounded like a jerk when I answered, but he was talking to everybody like, hey, how long you been training? How long you been here? Blah, 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 going around. He got to me and he goes, how long you been training? I said, well, about 18 years. And he went, "What?" He just kinda did the, "Huh?" So, and then finally, I was like, "My name's Stevie Richards," shook his hand, and I was asking him how he's doing and everything, and that was the end of it, but it was just like, and I felt bad afterwards because I was just trying to be funny and sarcastic, but if you're not, just like he was probably being sarcastic and I didn't get it earlier. If you don't know somebody, you can't do that. So I probably came off like it was like 18 years and he probably forgot about me 5 minutes later. But it was just that was my only dealing with Bret. I've had a few more with Shawn. So both very positive and somewhat disappointing. The positive one was when he first came back, he would always complimented me on the shape I was in. And this was after I went up to him and said, "Hey, I'm not going to use the kick. It's yours." We talked about that in a previous clip in a previous episode. So I already was familiar. I introduced myself probably for a 13th, 14th, maybe 25th time to him. And then I said, Shawn seems pretty cool. And Hunter would joke around and say, here's your idol, which I was totally fine with, because Hunter knew Shawn was somebody, main reason I got into the business. Shawn, I don't know, knew that or not. So I went up to him and I said, "Hey man, can I talk to you for like 2 minutes, please?" "Oh yeah, yeah, sure." Pulled him aside in catering or by the entrance where nobody was and said, "I just want to let you know that you're the reason I got into professional wrestling. I was a big fan of yours even before Heartbreak Kid, talked about Midnight Rockers, talked about them versus Doug Summers and Buddy Rose and AWA. And I was like, I was just such a huge fan, and you made such an impression on me that I just wanted to thank you for it because I wouldn't be in WWE today if it wasn't for you inspiring me to overcome the odds and be a wrestler." "Oh, okay, cool." Shook my hand and walked away. After that point, at first I was thought, is Hunter and Shawn together usually, or even one on one, he would do it. Are they just kind of haze me a little bit and give me a hard time because I said this? So I kind of took it in stride and laughed with him wherever. But then the language started to get into like, are you trying to? And we've all met our heroes. They've disappointed us at one time or another. I started to get the impression that he resented the fact that I told him this. And I was like, is he trying to get me to change my mind about how I feel about, "Oh, you think I'm such a good guy and a hero and inspiration?" And I just got this very off-putting vibe from him from that point on. It was almost like I thought we were becoming pretty friendly, not friends or anything, pretty friendly where I could ask him to watch my match or advice and he would give it. But that moment kind of turned everything around and put it in a downward spiral. So that was my first thing, and then I had a friend who was a Christian, musician in a band, and he was burning CDs and stuff, and he was like, "Hey, if you know anybody in the locker room that would give it a listen, I'd really like to, get the word out. I'm just giving this stuff away, I wanna get the word out." Fit Finley was one, there was a couple other guys that were really like, "Oh, that's cool, I can listen to this in the car." This is so long ago, we had CD players, which were brand new, I use air quotes,
Mm.
big upgrade from the cassette tapes. God, there are people who are like, "What the hell is a cassette tape?"
Your
So,
A-track.
I had an 8-track when I was a kid. Elvis, we used to listen to at lunchtime all the time. So, by the way, little Easter egg too, I love the fact that when Shawn turned heel and broke away from Marty Jannetty, that during the course of the TV tapings, they would announce that Shawn Michaels had left the building. So he was a huge Elvis fan too. So I was passing around these CDs, only about maybe half a dozen or 8, and I said, "Oh, I gotta find Shawn," because he would talk a little bit about his journey, his Bible study or whatever, and I even helped him with his computer to get some digital stuff onto his laptop. I was tech support, by the way, for him, Undertaker, and a bunch of other people. So, but I went up to him and I said, "Hey, Shawn," I go, "I have a friend who's in a Christian rock band, or I think it was Christian rock, and he wanted me to pass out some stuff to the boys." And I go, I couldn't think of a better person that could listen to this but you. And he looked at it, looked at me, looked at the CD, and he goes, "Let me ask you a question." And my heart sank because I was like, this isn't the response I was hoping for. And he goes, "Do you think giving me one of these makes you a good Christian?" And I was like, uh, I felt like crying at that point, James. I'm not going to lie to you. I was like, what? That's all I could do is what? And he's like, "Answer my question. Do you think this makes you a good Christian?" I go, "Well, no." I go, "But I was just trying to," and he was like, and I don't remember because I shut it out, dude, but I could swear I'm getting choked up. He gave me the CD back. I was like, "Oh, okay," you know, and then just walked away. I was like, "Okay." Now, what made it kind of like me not thinking I was singled out or, dealing with the two sides of Shawn Michaels, Dreamer told me this himself, and I believe it. He was sitting at catering with Shawn Michaels, and Shawn was telling him, "When you get out there, you got to get, basically get your stuff in, do this, make sure you get over." He was really like kind of not browbeating, but very intently telling Dreamer, "You got to be vicious, you got to do that." And Dreamer goes, "But Shawn, I thought you were a Christian." And he goes, "But I still got to get mine." So he said, "I am, but I still got to get mine." This was right, and Dreamer couldn't wait to tell me because he goes, "'Cause I told him about the CD incident, and you could even when I just recalled it, you could tell how it hurt me, right?"
Mhm.
And he was like, "I just wanna let you know, dude, it's not just you." And he told me the story, and it did kinda make me feel better, but it made me feel a lot worse because I was like, "Why does it have to be both ways?" Like, you can, I mean, I was just like, and I avoided Shawn every single time I say hello to him or whatever, but I would normally go the opposite way. So fast forward years and years and years later, one of the NXT writers reached out to me, and I'm friends with a mutual friend, Danny Jacks up in Massachusetts. Great kid, awesome, awesome dude. And he goes, "I didn't know you were friends with Danny Jackson." I was like, "Yeah, he's an awesome dude." And then he said something about NXT and being there. And I said, "Oh, just wondering, does Shawn still hate me? LOL." And then he messaged back and he was like, "Shawn doesn't hate or not hate anybody. He's like Switzerland." I was like, "Okay, not going to be handing any CDs out to him anytime soon." So I'm sorry, I got a little bit emotional and choked up about it, and I'm kind of like trying to find my words, but that to me was like if you ever met somebody and you verbalized or tried to put it out that this person inspired you to do something, or you go as far to say you're my hero, you just got to be careful. I know how many times has Dutch said it? Never meet your heroes. And I really am like, I regret even bringing that up to him. I really do. But for the sake of it, I'm kind of glad it happened because I got to see it. And that's the end of it. And maybe I kind of marked out for Shawn and I put him over and maybe he respected me less because of it. But I sure as hell learned a hell of a lesson that day that if any young wrestler or anybody I encounter who gives any reverence or any respect or even just is cool or has a question or is looking for a direction in the business, I'm never, ever, ever going to act like it's an inconvenience, like I'm annoyed by it, nor as uncomfortable as I am taking compliments, which you know that, James. Uh,
Mm.
as uncomfortable as I am taking compliments, I will never argue with somebody who says these things to me. I'm going to take that as, wow, out of all the people in the business, I stood out to you. That's awesome.
I had one follow-up question, and it was going to be, how did Shawn change over time? Because he obviously had the pre religious sort of experience, and then he sort of dedicates his life to it. But I've heard quite a few people. I don't know if it's Shane Helms or someone. I hope I'm not getting the name wrong. Just basically said it's a front.
Yeah, he famously cursed out Chris Jericho at catering, and Shane saw it. That's what Shane's talking about.
Mm.
That he was the old Shawn Michaels, and for some reason he was browbeating Jericho. And I could be wrong, but I believe that was the person. And Shane witnessed it and said, "This dude's a phony." I think he even told me about it. Like anytime anybody experienced anything with Shawn that they think might be useful to me, they would tell me about it because that's who I believe either told me or I saw the interview and then he talked to me about it.
I think in that example,
The interview was after WWE, by the way, when he was gone.
Yeah.
So
I think Chris Jericho wrote about it in maybe his third book, and I think it revolved around the fact that Chris was drunk and he made some sort of comment to Shawn that Shawn was keeping his kids up late because it was like a pay-per-view or WrestleMania night or something like that. And Shawn took umbrage on it. I don't know if that's the incident or it was something else.
Well, that's a whole different set of rules and context and conversation that I wasn't aware of. Yeah. I mean, you talk about somebody's family, kids, or especially how to raise them or when to put them to bed. I figure any parent would kind of like take offense to that or take issue.
Okay, so for our main event now, we're going to be talking about something we promised last week, and it is Secrets of the Ring revealed. So Stevie has come up with comparisons with all the major wrestling rings that he's wrestled in, ECW, WCW, WWE, etc. And then I've got a ton of follow-up questions as well. But Stevie, Secrets of the Ring, where would you like to start?
All right, the Secrets of the Ring reveal, the wrestling rings. Wrestling rings are not just a prop. They are a very important tool with the safety or the danger factor, more importantly, and more negatively importantly than anything. A good ring, you'll never notice. A bad ring, you're going to know right away. And I've been in a mixture of both. I've been in WWE rings. I've been in ECW rings. I've been on tons of independent wrestling. I've been in Japanese rings. I've been in European rings. I've been in all sorts of Ring of Honor, WCW, TNA, six-sided ring. I think we have a dedicated segment in the future just to that. And I have to say, it takes a lot. Now, I mentioned all these rings. When you get used to a ring, it's awesome. But when you got to switch over, say from a WCW ring to a WWE ring, we're going to talk about sizes in a second. And I think even when you switch from a WWE ring to the WCW ring back in the day, that's really, really tough because you're used to a number of steps across the ring. You're used to ropes versus cables. You're used to a particular type of turnbuckle. Even in some rings, this is the weird part, especially if you're getting thrown out, the height of the apron. Some independent wrestling promotions would literally have you wrestle in a boxing ring. And the boxing rings are only like maybe a foot off the ground. They don't need to be that high because the boxers are wearing gloves. They can't step into the ring like a pro wrestler. So they can't make it normally 4 feet high, something like that, 3 to 4 feet high. It's got to be much lower. So I know you got some general questions. We should probably get into that because then we can really differentiate what differs in each ring.
Okay, then. So we'll sort of end the segment on the comparisons between the major promotions rings, but I've got a lot of questions here. So are smaller rings more advantageous, as in less running, or do certain moves like a monkey flip become more perilous because you're always constantly near the ropes?
Both. And then we talked about the vanilla midget stuff earlier. The smaller rings are obviously going to have less effect when you're especially back pumping or front pumping, say the monkey flip, say a peel out of the corner, say even if you're taking a superplex and you have two really tall guys and it's in a 16 by 16, which is most independent rings are 16s, WCW's 18, and then WWE is famously 20 by 20. When that happens, I've seen independent shows where guys' heels off a superplex have hit the turnbuckle or the rope on the other side. So there is a real danger factor. Running can make it easier, but then again, say you go from a WWE ring to a WCW ring and you have 2 feet less in diameter, which is basically maybe about a foot less on each side, maybe a little bit less. But we're talking about depending upon your height and size. For me, going from WCW to WWE ring, it's an extra step to a step and a half each way. Now, if you go from that ring and you're saying, duck the clothesline, hit me with a drop kick or whatever, or duck my clothesline, I'll drop kick you, and the person's running. In a smaller ring, they're hitting your back before you turn around for the drop kick. That's where a WWE ring gives you the time to drop down, leapfrog, turn, hit a guy with a drop kick, backdrop. There's another bump. A backdrop, if somebody doesn't step forward enough, well, let's say this, in a WCW ring or a small independent ring, if somebody's taking a backdrop and you're giving it, you now have to measure that distance where you would take normally a full step or two in a WWE ring to backdrop somebody and give them the room to take the bump. Now in a smaller ring, you have to now figure out, if I step too close, I'm crowding them. They're not going to be able to base and take the backdrop, but they'll have enough room to bump. If I wait too far back, they're going to have enough room to post and go up, but their hamstrings could be hitting the top rope. It's really, and in my estimation, we'll get to the end what I prefer, but I think you know by what I'm saying that I prefer the bigger rings. More room to work is always a good thing. Then you introduce tag team match, 6-man, 8-man, battle royal. I sent you a picture. Big Chris can B-roll some of the photos. Guys standing in a WCW ring look like they were on a subway. It's like, just like this, commuting to work. The WWE ring obviously had a ton of guys in it, but there was still some space to kind of get your space in there. I think that's a good representation of just the size difference in the rings.
Next question is, we've already dealt with the heights of rings and just the difficulty, of like beeling out sometimes. Did WWE ring construction change over the years?
I'd say it had to. My information that I got secondhand, which by the way, I sent a video, we can link it in the description below. There's a guy that actually was the head of developing these rings, especially for WrestleManias in cold weather like MetLife Stadium. That's a fascinating video. I think we put that in the description. That's an official WWE video, and it just shows how WWE puts so much thought into everything. It's like stuff you and I would never think of, and obviously other wrestling promotions do not think of. The heights of rings, yeah, if it's too high and you take a bump out and you overshoot or you land weird, that can be a thing. The construction changed over the years in the way that during the Hogan Andre era, which by the way, I'll tell you a story after I answer the question. I wrestled in the WrestleMania 3 ring up in Wisconsin. They needed, and let's put Yokozuna, Mabel, these guys that would break a normal ring. These rings were reinforced. So then poor Randy Savage has to drop that elbow every night on a ring to support Andre the Giant. So I think they came up with a happy medium. WWE rings, at least when I left in 2008, still the hardest rings to bump in. And you need to acclimate yourself and condition yourself. You can wrestle all you want on every other show. You take one bump in a WWE ring without being prepared or trained for it, or taking bumps, in a wrestling school with it, it's going to knock the wind out of you. It's almost going to feel like you broke your back. It's very, very tough. But I think they have a happy medium, at least towards the end of my run. They had a happy medium where it kind of bounced. But Vince also, from my estimation, what I heard, I think it was from Terry Taylor and Vince Russo, he hated that movement in the ring for TV. I think the first time he really noticed it was when they were going to Saturday Night's Main Event, and they had a huge casual fan audience. And he didn't want the ring to look like a fake mattress that bounced. So it's changed quite a bit. And I think they're still trying. If I'm guessing correctly, they're taking into account, since there are smaller wrestlers in 2024, taking into account the longevity, the safety, the health concerns, and really testing that ring out to make sure, okay, how many bumps does this smaller and women? Let's talk about the women bumping. If women had a bump in that Andre and Hogan ring, oh my God, I could barely survive it, and they don't have the fat that I have on my body, to be able to do it. So yeah, I love that video. When I watched that video, James, of that guy breaking it down, he was like the ring designer version of the whiteboard. So detailed, so awesome.
Let's get to some safety stuff then. So, I'll skip how long it takes to put up and break down a ring. Did we talk about this before?
We have a time lapse of that, by the way, if we can put it up.
Yeah,
I sent you a time lapse video of that.
Okay, we'll put that up while I ask you this next thing. So, how do you check ring condition before wrestling in it? Because I've heard various different stories. I mean, obviously, some stuff like, checking like exposed nails or something. But to test a ring out for safety, how would you go about it?
First things first, you would get up. I would walk around the apron to see if there's any. The number one thing for me would be lumps, bolts, and holes in the ring. That would be what I would be searching for. So I would get there, I would get there and walk around the apron, test it out. I would also test the ropes or the cables out to see if they're tight enough. And this is usually like after it's all assembled. So they don't have much time because on an independent show, they're putting the ring up maybe even as the doors open, they're finishing up. So you don't have a whole lot of time. But if I'm on a show, I would hope that they would put up the ring and get everything set up before doors open, which I think more times than not is the case. When I get into the ring, before I even run the ropes, which you famously see, a lot of wrestlers just run the ropes to test it. I will do the same thing. I will walk in a circle until I get towards the center so I can cover like a grid almost around the ring towards the center. And if I detect a hole, bolts, any of that stuff, I'll alert the ring crew and ask them, hey, can you guys fix this? Or maybe there's a board missing. And if they don't do it, I have to take the appropriate action or inaction to not bump in that ring. And there will be times I won't, because it's just, you take a back bump, you land your back on a bolt, you could be done. You can break your back just like that. So that's what I would look for. The layers of the ring, I don't know the exact construction, but obviously you have the metal underneath the girder, like the metal girders. You usually have wood, you have rubber, you have some other materials, you have some foam, and then you have the canvas. Some places put metal for, WWE, I think, had a composite like Formica during the Andre Hogan stuff because it would not give, it would not break. More times than not, the people putting up the ring do care, but you have your times here and there where they just want to put up the ring, get back, start drinking, or they're working that night, so they need to get ready for their match. So welcome to independent wrestling. WWE, they have that ring up like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, because they would train, they would bring people in that would have dark matches and test them out and run drills. And they pay attention to every nuance and detail of ring safety. So that's the most important part, is getting the ring up in time so that talent can test it out.
I've heard once that to test out the safety of a mat or, maybe loose boards, it's best to walk around the ring in bare feet. Is that something you've ever heard of?
I haven't heard that, but I would think the more weight that you have, or the more you're in full gimmick and full gear, what you're going to wear when you're running the ropes or walking around, because you can walk around and not detect anything barefoot, but the boots add a certain level of weight to you, and then walking isn't going to expose the deficiencies of the ring. Running will. Running the ropes. I'm not talking about fast. Running the ropes will determine if the ropes are tight enough, if the ropes are high enough or low enough. Sometimes they make them super low or way too high. Make sure that the posts aren't going to come in as you're running the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
These are the tests right there. Make sure also the mats sometimes are not taut enough. So there might be wrinkles in the mat that you can trip over. Believe it or not.
Chris Candido famously broke his leg in TNA because of that. Yeah.
Because there was a lump in the ring and the ring canvas was kind of like up. You can easily trip over that. So running the ropes with boots on and going and even running the turnbuckles and like taking a turnbuckle to see if the opposite post is going to just cave in like Big Show and Brock. The ring collapses towards the center. That's a great spot, but not when you do the first spot in the match.
Very, very briefly, is it the referee's job to check for ring deficiencies, or is it the wrestlers or whoever?
Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody. And everybody, first match, if there's a problem, tell the second match. Or if it's a big enough problem, you got to tell the promoter and tell the next match, don't go out there. We got to fix the ring. Everybody's got to work as a team. No matter, we talked about Bret and Shawn earlier, personal feelings, all that. No matter how you feel about anybody in that ring, you never let them go, or outside the ring, I should say, or personally. You never let a fellow talent or personality, ring announcer, referees, anybody get into that ring willing or knowing. Jeez, here we are. We're 2 hours in. You never let anybody go through that curtain, walk the aisle, and get into a ring that you wouldn't get into yourself. You don't do it.
This is WWE centric, but how heavy are the stairs leading up to the ring? Because, Jim Ross would say that's anywhere between 150 pounds and 150 tons. So how heavy are the stairs generally?
They're pretty heavy. I would say I would average 75 or 100 pounds.
Just the top half?
Yeah, top half is pretty heavy because you're talking about steel to some point. It's not aluminum. It doesn't bend. And the whole, and my back is hurting just thinking about it, grabbing it from the handles and like using it like a strongman competition, like those big boulders, and then having to protect somebody. They're heavy, dude. I've never picked them up. I've been hit with them. I've done the back thing where they did that. And I think that's where the 150 tons comes in because it felt like someone dropped a Mack truck on my back.
Next, different. Did WWE have different rings for the house shows than they did for the TV?
Not different in size, not different in quality. And now I think they do run the house shows like TV shows with Titantrons and stuff like that, even some pyro here and there. Back then, it would be certain rings in certain areas, Midwest, North, South, Southeast, Southwest. WWE, man, like I said last week about the trucks always traveling, they have rings everywhere. And they kind of leave them there. I'm sure they have probably 2 or 3 rings in Europe. That they go over there to use them. That's it. They invest so much money into these rings. But the house show rings compared to the TV rings would probably not be steam clean for TV, would not be the best aprons. Now, the actual rings and ropes and turnbuckle, they need to be uniform and they need to be just as safe as a TV, live TV or a TV taping. But they didn't skimp on anything. I don't know if that's the case with AEW. Did they even run house shows?
Well, WWE are barely running house shows at this point. AEW are running even less. So, that's something for another show, obviously. Right, we're going to talk about the mats briefly. So this is the canvas, actually. Do you clean the canvas when it gets mucky? Can you just not clean it? Do you just have to replace it?
I believe they steam cleaned it. I believe there was a commercial steam cleaning or they had the equipment to do that. I know that they would sometimes steam clean or vacuum it. They would definitely vacuum the ring at WWE. They did so many different things as part of their standard operating procedure that's just really stuff you don't think about. Of course you vacuum the ring, it gets dirty, But then again, also you have to book the show according to what you're doing. You can't have the first match on a TV show with tons of blood, and then for the next 3 hours, you have blood all over the ring. And WWE, by the way, is really great. Remember they used to do 205 Live, or they would do they would do these different things after Raw or SmackDown, even ECW. The way the crew would switch the apron, switch the ring, switch the turnbuckles, switch the ropes in 15 minutes. It's crazy.
One more thing about mats. Have you ever wrestled in a ring with a vinyl mat rather than canvas?
Yes. Tarp.
Okay. There's got to be a story in
slope. What
Yeah.
a slippery slope, all puns intended. And it started to rain.
Oh, it was
I was in
outdoors.
Miami.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Outdoor tarp mat, boxing ring in Miami. I have to say during rainfall.
What could go wrong?
And last match. So I had baby
Oh.
oil, everybody been slipping around. Yeah, it was great. So much fun.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you how much I got paid for that.
Well,
I'm
Miami.
literally not going to tell you, but you can guess.
Okay. I was
It's
going to say
not good.
Miami. It might be, half a gram, I guess. Who knows?
No, you can't buy me with that. Most of the boys you can, but not me.
No.
If you hand me a video game, maybe.
Okay. Technical question now, because I know you like your technical questions audio-wise. How do you mic a ring? And did ECW mic their rings in the day?
I've honestly never seen a mic under a ring. Now, WWE, I believe, especially at the Garden, had that cool old school microphone that Howard Fink and then would go, the Mr. Kennedy one. It would go back up. That, I believe, is the extent of miking the ring and miking the crowd. Now, sometimes I've heard they would mic the crowd and drop mics over the crowd to sweeten the sound. Now they do it like basically technology based with a soundboard. But I don't recall a mic ever being underneath the ring. Now, I have watched shows where I'm like, oh my God, the ring has to be mic'd. But I've never personally been involved with that.
Do you know I was going to suggest one, and you were in the semi-main of it, was Barely Legal. And I remember that ring sounding completely different to the ECW rings of old. I think I talked to Shane Douglas about this, and I think that might have been a brand new ring for that event, and that's why it sounded different.
No, we actually got a good. We didn't have good rings at all. That was the ring with the nuts and the bolts and the holes and the peaks and the valleys and all that stuff. That was the one. We had to measure the curvature of the ring, not the curvature of the earth. So, no, but I remember Barely Legal was like, oh, we finally got a new ring. And that's why it was so loud, because that other one was so muffled, but it was almost like a stuffed animal. You were stuffing foam and just making it worse. And then we got a proper ring.
So, where are we now?
The microphones we cut the promos on didn't work half the time. Why would we waste a mic on a ring?
Speaking of rings, various rings, do all rings have generally a safe radius or like a safe bumping zone within the ring, or do they depend ring to ring? Because, I imagine, let's say it's a 20 by 20 ring and the inner 10 feet are the safest, but does it vary?
You always want to end up trying to land as close to the center of the ring as possible. The reason being, no matter what way or what size a ring is or how it's constructed, you obviously have metal girders around the edge or a metal brace. Then you have metal that goes across. So, and then in the center, some do have a spring. Some have a spring in the center to prevent the ring from collapsing. It's not about it bouncing or anything. It's about preventing the ring from just caving in. But if you get to the edge, that's why I don't understand, dude. I'm going to sound so old saying this. Power bombs on the edge of the apron, suplexes on the apron, Germans on the apron.
Well, they all lead to the finish, don't they? Oh, wait, no, they don't.
All zero of them do. Yeah. That's the new tackle drop down hip toss. It's German me on the apron. But that's why workers have avoided it. There's no give. And also, a lot of times you get some sound. The audible sound of the crash of the body in the center is what makes people think that was a big bump. He landed hard. Not that's the apron.
Well, you hear the person go loud, you go, oh.
Yeah, if you hear if the person's grunt is louder than the bump of the ring, you're bumping in the wrong part of the ring.
Which rings, now this is a term that I'd never heard before until you mentioned it with the Bret and Goldberg video. It is which rings had the most bite, as in jumped up and sort of basically gives you a mini concussion by sort of like bouncing up and hitting you in the head.
Usually the ones with the spring. But then you have, it's a double-edged sword either way. You can have the WrestleMania 3 ring. It's not going to bite you after you bump, but it's going to bite you when you bump. That's for damn sure. So Having longer hair allowed me to tuck my chin more so it wouldn't bite me. But when you're getting speared by Goldberg, no chin tuck's going to help.
Did you ever get to the point where you'd like just cover the back of your head with your hand or arm or something like that for certain bumps?
Okay, now where your arm is right there, like this.
Yeah.
Now think about when you're bumping. What do you think might has a potential of happening with your hand back here?
A couple of different things. Your finger could be in the wrong position. You could break your finger. You could just... There's just bone on bone, I guess, so it doesn't offer you too much protection. You could throw out your shoulder.
That's the one. Yeah. That's the big one. You can dislocate your shoulder. You can have a rotator cuff injury. But what I look at it is you put the hand in the back of your head. Now the ring's going to come up and bite and maybe hyperextend your fingers, and you're still going to feel your head hitting the mat. It's just better to avoid, and sometimes you just got to take it. You just got to take it because it just happens. You're going to know when it happens. Now, hopefully, with wrestling training, James, you learn to duck. I mean, you should duck like I did with Rob Van Dam and forgot to do. You have to tuck because guaranteed at wrestling school, 95 to 99% of the time, you're going to hit the back of your head. It's the only way you learn to properly tuck on a bump. So, but it's going to get you. That's it.
This next question is going to be something that, for like fans like me, will pretty much be able to guess it. But, for some people who are watching this who aren't like major wrestling fans or, just dip in and out or just watching this video and just wanting to know, what is hidden underneath a wrestling ring typically? And also, because we know with wrestling so many times a weapon is hidden under the ring as well, is it your job to put the weapon under the ring and make sure it's there, or is that an agent's job or someone else's?
I want you to try to answer how I would answer the question.
Okay. It is my job because it's my gimmick in my match.
That's a short answer. DTA. Don't trust anybody. Don't trust anybody. You ask somebody to do it, and then you give them the proper time. Because if you ask them to do it and you go out there and say, okay, I'll do it because I don't believe you're going to do it, that's not very political. You ask them to do it, an hour later, you can say, hey, here's how you do it. Not, did you put it under the ring? Hey, can I take a look at the stuff you put under the ring? I just want to make sure that the trash can or the chair or the table are safe and we can do the spot. I want to make sure I know where it's at. What are you essentially doing? You're following up, but you're not saying, I don't believe you. So you go out there. What's normally under the ring is all the tools and everything needed to build and break down the ring. Things go under the ring, get it, the tools, the wrenches, all that stuff. Also, if they have to switch over and need spares, I think they do store most times the ropes if they need the ropes break or they got to switch and any smaller stuff. But if there is a spot where you need tables, chairs, trash cans, all that stuff, I think those will stay in the production box and be whaled out, in between shows.
Do WWE specifically, so let's say one table is going to be used in the show, that's what it's penciled in for, would they put supplemental plunder under the ring just in case 2 or 3 are used and the options there?
Yeah, because, look at Botchmania. So I am the table. So that's a little shout out for them. But you can grab a leg and it can break. So you're going to need at least triple redundancy. That's what I would like. 3 tables for 1 table spot, just in case.
Okay, so we've got some ring construction questions now. Then we're going to get to the final questions and we'll wrap this podcast up. But I can already tell this is going to be our best so far.
What did you call them? What did you say?
No, I didn't say that. Damn it. Oh, for God's sake. We're never going to get this right. Right, ring construction. Do the rings have a frame or ropes going crisscrossing underneath to stabilize the posts? So what's more, is it like a metal frame or ropes more often?
It's like that, like the bike locks have the cable, like the security cable. Mm-hmm. It's like a metal cable. I don't think it has the clear plastic like bike locks do, but those are diagonal and those add the tension and keep the post from falling down.
So there's not a frame. So like a giant like X-shaped frame kind of thing. Just
not
like
a giant X-shape. No, it's the square of the metal, and then across is the metal beams that go across. Then it's crossed with that. And then, with the spring construction in the center, I'm not sure how that works. And if the beams have to be obviously not towards the center, they have to be spread out. And I don't know how the ring post tensioning would work, but I have seen rings that have that, especially WWE.
So older rings have springs under the iron. So I believe the irons is the terminology for the metal frame which the wood and the mats sit on.
Yes.
Yes. So why were the springs phased out and replaced with foams? And can you just explain what foams are?
Well, I don't know if I don't know if WWE had springs and replaced them. In other words, I've never seen a spring under a WWE ring. I've seen springs under independent wrestling rings, but the WWE one, I believe, it's just a tight. See, when you add the spring into it, you're adding movement, which like I said before, Vince hated for TV. So, and you could say, well, let's put the spring ring on the house shows to protect the talent. It's easier. But then by the end of the tour, that bump in the WWE TV ring, it's going to feel even stiffer. So you got to be uniform across the board. So I'm not familiar. I got to do some indie shows and see. I'm not familiar with the current construction of the rings, but I will sacrifice my spine for you and the audience and do
if you give us enough money. I mean, we've got to have an incentive. Yeah.
It's it's called the Dutch Mantel clause. You gotta pay.
He will do it, but have you ever heard of jacks under the ring to support rings further for like a battle royal or something like that? Have you ever heard of that kind of affair?
Probably a jack because the ring collapsed and somebody went out to their car and got a jack.
Yeah, maybe. Next one is turnbuckle pads. There's two different types as far as I can tell. The WWE style ones, which are like a square piece of foam. The old WWF ones were like almost like packing foam, weren't they? You know, George the Animal Steel would rip them out and eat it. And then the other one is almost like a vinyl covered one that wraps over and it's almost like a taco, I guess, and wrap it up that way. What is more comfy or less hurty, I guess, if I'm going to put it that way, to take a bump into?
Well, turnbuckles are hard for me. They've always been like my albatross throughout my career to take a good turnbuckle, like a Bret Hart turnbuckle, which nobody can take it like that. I personally would prefer the non-slippery version of turnbuckles because you're going to have backs, oily, people with baby oil hitting that, people on the top rope who have stuff on the bottom of their shoes, and they might slip off or the next person. So I like the foam turnbuckles, and I believe what you're talking about is when they encase the corner with the turnbuckle, they have to zip tie it with the little loops in the back to get it going. I prefer that, and I always love the visual, by the way, of not the George the Animal Steel, which is also a great visual, but when you're untying the turnbuckle to expose, or you're untying the pad to expose the bare turnbuckle, I love that spot. You know, rather than trying to unsnap it or unzip tie it or take wire cutters, it's better to untie it. It's more visual.
Rope or cable? So which is better? And are there different types of rope? Because I've actually heard there's rope and then there's like a hemp version of it as well that can sort of react slightly differently. But rope or cable? You're going to be political with the answer, I know.
You know?
No, I can just tell you went, and you're going to have like 50 for one, 50 for the other.
No, I'm actually leaning towards rope because of my style. Rey Mysterio, as we talked about earlier, had to make a major adjustment from WCW to WWE. Besides the size of the ring, springboarding is completely different. Top rope moves are completely different. Springboard topes are completely different. And if you didn't notice, if you watch one of my matches, you're going to watch all of them because it has none of that. Thrown through the middle of ropes, you don't need to care about rope or cable. Now, for running the ropes, cables are much easier to give you a bounce off. But personally, I prefer to have control over that. And for some reason, I always remember we talk about Shawn Michaels running the ropes. Just the way he did in his back, and it would look like a slingshot. It had more give, and it looked like it catapulted him more than the cables, which had no movement. So that's why initially my answer would be, well, cables are tight, they're safer, you can do more with them, but the ropes always have more of a visual, like elastic type of look during the spots. And for me, somebody who doesn't fly, I like the ropes better. But for somebody that does fly all the time, I guarantee if they had a choice, they probably would love a 20-foot ring with cables in WWE.
Do you know, I prefer the ropes purely as a viewer because I like the visual texture of them. It makes it seem like a more traditional, like there's more history with it. With the cables, they're a lot smoother. And
What's funny about it too, boxing rings have ropes. So it almost makes it look more like a legitimate boxing ring. Then, dude, I did a deep dive before we even got online, and I was looking at like the time lapse. I was watching a video by the head engineer of the ring. Then I looked and I was like, people were saying these ropes that WWE, they import them and they treat them, and they just a level of detail and maintenance that goes into just the ring. It's crazy. So yeah, I prefer rope too. Not only aesthetically, but as a worker. I guess I'm in more control running the ropes. I don't want somebody to bounce me back before I'm ready to go.
What type of ring ropes were more prone to breaking or failing?
We've seen more WWE rings. The ropes break. The top rope always broke for some reason. I don't know why, because everybody's running them. The cables, I would say, I'm thanking God they don't break more often, because what if they snapped and then you got lashed with the interior part of it, or it's encased in rubber, so that's good. But if you talk about getting bit in your back, that's it. And by the way, I'm just going to talk about running the ropes. If you don't grab the rope as you're running it and running into it, you are taking a horrible chance. Because I saw Mark Henry, I saw a couple other people, it snaps, and if you're not hooking, you're just gonna go backwards, or you're gonna go straight down, or you're gonna go onto your head. When you hook it, you at least have a chance of kind of collapsing with the rope instead of going out ass over tea kettle. So that's one thing. We can get into people that run the ropes horribly too, but that's another episode.
Oh, that will be another video. Very quickly,
and the people that run the ropes the worst are some of the people I am actually the closest with in wrestling. So it's truly objective. But I've told them this right to their face, that they're awful at it.
Which ropes hurt more, rope or cable?
Rope. Rope hurts. Rope burned. The cable kind of can get you, but the ropes have a kind of a gliding friction effect as you come off of them.
Ranking the rings from major promotions. So we're not going to have the 6-sided ring with TNA. That's going to be its own video. So we have WWF. We have WWE, which I believe at some point there was a switch around between the two, as you confirmed. WCW, the 18 by 18 foot version. We have ECW, the various versions. We have the TNA square ring, and we have Ring of Honor, 2016 version of the ring. So of all those, 7 that I gave, can you rank them for us as far as best to worst? I've written it at the bottom of the page there as well, so you can see.
Thank you. I've never wrestled in a TNA 4-sided ring.
Really?
Only a 6-sided, yeah, so we can eliminate that. We can talk about them switching and dedicate a segment to that in a future episode. So, number 1 ring I've ever worked in was the WWE ring. Number 2 ring, WCW. Number 3 ring, WWF. For the, talking about the WrestleMania 3 ring, I've worked a couple shows. That was all I needed. The last one that ranks last is the ECW ring. Because of what I said, before they switched over at Barely Legal, it was definitely one of the worst. And the funny part was that ring was a local indie wrestler, and that ring would follow me like a curse on the indie scene in the Northeast. It was like, and I knew exactly where the same bolts were and all the other stuff. That was the only saving grace, that I knew the ring. but it severely limited me on a lot of indies and ECW in some ways. Dude, if people look back, 2 bumps, the super bomb from the pit bulls through the table at the 2 out of 3 falls double dog collar match, September 10th, 1995. How's that? CTE, you lose today. That super bomb. And then they gave me, I don't even know what it was called. One of them picked me up in a vertical suplex. The other was up there for the super bomb, except Gary held onto my head upside down. And then they ran out with me. Both those times, it was each side of the ring. I landed on both bolts that I always tried to avoid. Murphy's Law. And by the way, what the horrible feeling is when you're a young wrestler and you're too green to open your mouth and say no, and you're sitting there and the pit bulls are explaining this move to you, and basically if I had a cell phone, I would have dialed 9-1 and just put it down because it was not coming. I was not coming out of that the same, and I didn't. It was, dude, I got friggin' pile drived off the top rope, and they let me go.
We need to talk to Gary Wolf about that one day, I think. That didn't come up when I interviewed him, but that's only because I didn't know that story. Now I do. We'll have to... you got to bring the chair shot up to him, too. Oh, God, yeah, will do.
I think the first thing I was like, I love Stevie. I love you too, Gary.
Yeah. You know, the next week we're batting around the ideas of injuries and major injuries and various different things, so that might be one of the headline stories for now. But you know what? This show... Damn it. This show that we keep saying that we're going to shorten up every single week gets longer and longer, for God's sake. I don't know what we're going to do about that. We've just got too much to talk about.
That's what's called a rib, everybody out there.
Yes.
A rib.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? Most people will say they want it longer.
My voice is cursing me right now. My voice is just telling everybody.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do the outro, then I'll save your voice. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. As I say, I've got 2 books. Stevie's got the fitness channel, of course. Links are in the description. And also Cameo. His Cameo is blowing up as well. So if you want a cameo from Stevie Richards, the link is in the description. Click on that and book yours today. This show is out every single Friday, of course. Please tell your friends and your family. Tell your enemies, for all I care. And we're also on every single podcast platform as well. So once again, thank you so much for supporting the show and the YouTube channel, and we will catch you again next Friday.